There is an interesting aspect of the HR practice that I think is not getting the intentionality of attention that it requires. That is learning and development. The application of the practice has largely been in the context of compliance without giving regard to what this battery of interventions that we craft are purposed to solve or address. Because my belief is, and this is in fact the fundamental principle of learning and development, that we need to inform the interventions based on evidence. And largely by evidence, we mean the exact business problems that we want to solve. But the unfortunate part is we then implement learning and development just as a way of managing our burn rates, of ensuring that our spend is aligned with the spending plan. You see, we plan for training and development interventions at budgeting season or at the beginning of the year. And then in the course of the year, the primary interest then becomes, how do we spend this money? And so we look for reasons or for ways that will enable us to spend the money that was saved up, was budgeted for. Because after all, if you don't spend it, you lose it. So it becomes problematic that then we define the need for training and development based on just the pressure of spending what is available. That is a poor, very unintelligent basis for crafting training or learning and development interventions in their broadness. We also have a rising pandemic where we have consultants and vendors that all purport to be trainers and experts in anything that is related to organization or business. You find one person that claims to be an expert in business development, in motivation, in recruitment, such that they can train you on anything and everything. Well, that may be true for some business consultants that have experts under them. I think for the majority of offshoots that we have now, that is not true. That they could have experts in many or all the areas that they claim to be expert in. And also because as organizations, we don't believe in our own capabilities internally in terms of these interventions. We believe that we need to import solutions for problems to be solved. We don't look to our HR departments for interventions that could possibly aid the problems of business that we have, particularly those problems that have to do with behaviors, that have to do with enhancing capabilities of our teams. And so we find ourselves chasing for external consultants and vendors who, unfortunately, they have a barrage of preconceived and predefined training interventions such that the content exists before your problem. So the only thing that they will then do is they will only take your logo and your identity and embed it in existing slides. But it will be the same slide deck that was offered to another organization on some leadership development program. But I don't want to paint every consultant with the same brush, because I am fully aware that some consultants on learning and development will do a good job to engage first with you for a pre-briefing on what the problem is and what you need to solve. If they are genuine enough, they're going to tell you that in this case, you don't even need a training intervention. But if it's the uncanny, mischievous ones, they are going to seek every buck from you. So they are going to tell you and inflate in fancy language what your problem is. So you see, we need to look internally for capacity. At least these people have an understanding, at least plausibly, of what the problems are. They can understand better. It's not on every occasion that we will need external capacity in the form of consultants or vendors. And then with another common and very much abused intervention, team building. Team building is thrown in whenever an organization says they have a problem that they need to be solved. And in many cases, you hear people saying we need to do team building for our team. And it is never accompanied by a justification as to what exactly is the issue in the team that needs to be fixed or solved. It is as if the team building has become a way that organizations or teams can justify corporate funded getaways, a mechanism for breaking away from routine and slowing down the workday and justify it as team building. The nomenclature deliberately selected to communicate or imply that this benefits the team. But maybe it does. But sometimes team building should be informed as well by the problem that we want it to solve. It should not be framed as a mechanism for us to get away. And if done right, the team building should start from the problem. We engage with the vendor if we so seek to engage a vendor, and then we tell them exactly what we want them to solve or to fit into, at least insofar as the solution is concerned. And then we as HR teams and the vendors, we can look over the content and see how it responds to the question of the organization. If the prescribed content will speak to the solution, the problems that we've identified in that team. Generally, these team building or learning and development interventions are supposed to be evaluated so that we are able to connect the intervention to the business problem and its resolution, or at least improvement. But there is no incentive or motivation for us to do that because it is hella tough to actually measure the impact of training interventions. So what do? We then will give out some happiness chart that masquerade as evaluation of the training. And what we are actually measuring is not the effectiveness of the training, but the happiness of the participants about the training. Maybe not so much even the training, but the program as a whole. So if we sprinkle the colorful team building activities and the distractions from the workday, if we also sprinkle the delectable cuisine as part of the program, we take people somewhere to some resorts that feeds into the supposed evaluation of the training. However, that evaluation does not speak to the content and it does not tell us the impact of the training. It just tells us how happy people are to have been at Victoria Falls, to have been at Nyanga. That is a weakness in the infrastructure of our learning and development because that does not add any value. Rather, what we need to do when we are evaluating training or these interventions is that we should progressively do so. We can send out some assessment 3 months down the line and then check in also with the participants if they're having challenges mapping what they learned onto practice. And then they are guided progressively to help them to translate the theory into practice. And then again, we also must check in with the teams to do some pulse checks to see if there's any change state from the manager or the leader's approach to leading their team before the training. You see, this cannot be an event. It has to be progressive. It has to be continuous, particularly so in the context of leadership. Leadership is not a destination. It is a continuous journey where you redefine yourself and you respond and position yourself for the future needs of the organization and the context, also aligning yourself with best practice. So yeah, we have a lot to do when it comes to learning and development interventions, because we need to be guided by the science. We need to be guided by our employee engagement surveys, by our exit data, by capacity gaps that we identify in our teams. And until we arrive at a point where the data informs our interventions, all that we will do is theater. We'll just be thinking of team building engagements, of training interventions, but not as an impactful intervention that affects the business, that improves the fortune of the business or the behavior or the culture in organizations, but only as a tick box, compliance, or budget spending mechanism. I hope we can do better. And that is my challenge to you. Cheers.